You're now listening to the Tunelectric podcast with Rob Cox. For more, visit tunelectric.com. Hi everyone, this is Rob here. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast today. This is episode 1, and I'm really excited to be starting this new chapter with Tunelectric. Its aim is to entertain and inspire guitarists of all levels and ages, and to act as a bridge, delivering insider knowledge and tips from the pros to the average player. We've got some great guests lined up for you in the coming weeks. I'll be talking to top quality players in a variety of genres, as well as guitarist industry experts, manufacturers, and social influencers. My guest today has no doubt been an inspiration for thousands of players over the years. His Blues Headlines column in Guitarist magazine is stronger than ever, and his demos set the benchmark for other aspiring YouTubers. Since working as a session guitarist, both live and in the studio, he's played in front of thousands on numerous stages around the world. When he's not out on the road with the Tony Hadley band, he's writing and recording music in his home studio. And there's some exciting news about that coming up too. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome to the first episode of this podcast, Mr. Richard Barrett. Hi Rich, thanks so much for coming on. I just wanted to give people a little overview. I'm sure thousands of people have heard of you. You've been around for a while. I'm not saying, you've been, you know your onions, So I just want to sort of whiz back to the beginnings really quickly. What was the first music you remember hearing?
Well, we're talking early to mid 70s, and we're talking glam rock and stuff coming out of my eldest brother's bedroom. Him and his mate used to sit in there, and all sorts of music used to come up, from the Beatles to the Moody Blues to the Sweet, David Bowie. I can just remember hearing things like big E minor chords on acoustic guitars. So I just remember being really inspired and being bought ukuleles as a result of my nagging, can I have a guitar? Around about that time, I also have to say that you'd see guitar on the TV a lot. So people as bizarre as Val Doonican playing his Ovation acoustic guitar, I'd see that.
Okay.
What model is that? Well, that's a nice red. And so it was an obsession of all sorts, not only how to play, but how to, but what they were, how they worked. But the first artist where I heard it and learned how to play it, probably Beatles. I'd sit and work out how to play Beatles songs.
Wow, that's a pretty good template there for anything.
And I'd limp my way through them, and sometimes I'd even work out chords I didn't know yet. I can remember working out C chord completely wrongly, with an open bottom E root, but it was close enough.
Was there a singer-songwriter type phase when you were listening to the Beatles sort of earlier on, or was it more to do with the guitar skills?
It was more to do with the sound of the acoustic guitar, I would say. Loving the sound of it. And I still do, actually. And then working out how they were doing it, and that I wanted to do it. In fact, another thing's just come to mind that really inspired me, and that was, of all things, and I probably shouldn't be admitting this, but there was a cover of Pinball Wizard segueing into See Me, Feel Me by the New Seekers.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember hearing I didn't know about The Who at the time. I just heard this, frantically strummed acoustic guitar, and remember thinking, that sounds great. I want to be able to do that.
So can you remember the first guitar? Was it an acoustic?
Yes, I remember it well. In fact, I recently saw one for sale secondhand, because I don't have the original, and I had to buy it for old time's sake. It was by Barnes and Mullins, the distributor, and it was a nylon strung guitar, and it was a full size, because I had quite long fingers even then, and I remember my hand being put across the fretboard and it being decided that yes, he could have a full size one.
Oh, that's handy, because, a lot of people suffer with short fingers, me included. But, to start off with those.
Right.
You know, you can reach right up to play your first G chord or something.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I guess that was the issue. Not that I played the full-size G chord for quite a couple of years after that probably, but I can remember it being decided that that would be okay for me. We got the acoustic guitar home and it was not in any sort of tune. I couldn't wait, and I had a couple of pieces worked out on it, you know, strumming and moving my fingers up and down. But then, of course, I started my guitar lessons at junior school in whatever it was, autumn of 1976, and those tunes were the first casualty. You know, once we were doing this terrible EAD GBE tuning, I didn't know anything.
So you did take some kind of structured lessons at school, was it, or sort of after school or something? Or?
Yes, Row, Row, Row Your Boat was the first one with the G chord, you know, thinnest string, 3rd fret. And then I think we might have progressed on to something like Frog Went a Courtin'. It was, you know, not revolutionary stuff, but Miss Dunn, the sort of hippie teacher that drove her Citroen 2CV into school every day, helped me at lunchtimes, yeah. And then we had another really cool teacher called Miss Holder who could do a full bar chord on the F. And she was a real guitar hero to me, quite seriously, actually. And
impressive.
My parents were coming round to our house on a Monday night, and she was absolutely brilliant, really encouraging. She put me on to a friend of hers that was also a music teacher in a different school, but he was pretty cool. He could play lead guitar, which I hadn't even considered at the time, and he would reiterate a lot of what I was learning at school on my sort of music lessons about harmony and theory and all that stuff, and then we'd jam.
So what was it about the guitar? Was it just that you'd seen your heroes on TV and the sound? Or?
I think mainly the sound, but certainly the heroes on TV. I mean, I definitely remember Starman on Top of the Pops and David Bowie's blue 12-string guitar and that kind of thing. And it was definitely the acoustic guitar, though. The electric came along about the time I went to this other teacher I was just talking about, Mr. Prenter. He awakened my interest, and once, because that was just another world, and once he'd shown me a couple of things and I started to recognize them on records and thought, wait a minute, I could do that, because I'd definitely not considered that I could do that at all in any way before, but then thought, well, wait a minute, yeah, this is really interesting then.
Yeah, it's great to have those heroes to look up to, isn't it? And obviously the tragic loss of Van Halen very recently, you know, and it's just there seem to be lots of just pioneers really of the guitar world just that we're losing. It's really sad, but do you think your heroes change over time?
I've been through lots of periods where I've been obsessed with a certain player. I know that for electric playing, and when I was getting into rock, definitely Alex Lifeson from Rush, big, and Jimmy Page as well, probably about the same time. But I also remember when all my friends that were into music at school were talking about being into heavy music, and I'd seen footage of people like The Who smashing guitars and finding it absolutely horrific, and thinking, I don't know about that. I like the Beatles, and there'd also been, my brother had This Is the Moody Blues, a kind of best of, with all these sort of hippie songs on it with acoustic guitar and all these pictures of them on the gatefold sleeve, all having a jolly good time touring and playing. And this heavy thing didn't seem to jive at all with that. But having heard Andy Summers of The Police and James Honeyman Scott, the original guitarist with the Pretenders, I remember thinking, okay, so if I play electric guitar, it doesn't have to be heavy and bash your brains out and deafen you. It didn't have to be like that, though I sort of did get into that later anyway. So I would say that there have been a few, and what you're saying is right, that you progress through different players, and some you kind of move on maybe to a certain extent, but remember, you know, the feeling comes back when you hear it, like smelling a smell like baking bread or something from childhood. It's very evocative, and you think, oh yeah, I remember hearing that.
When you left school, did you want to pursue a career in music straight away, or was it another direction that you were persuaded to go in first, or was it something that you knew you wanted to do music, so you're going to pursue that?
I was lucky enough to be encouraged in music by my parents, and though I can't really honestly say, looking back, that it was clear in my mind. I knew that it was what I wanted to pursue in some way, and I was beginning to feel like I might have enough aptitude to do that. And I had a few friends, actually, people are still friends, that were very encouraging. And, you know, they give you that confidence to think, right, okay, I think I can do this. And really, one of the first things that was great for me was working in a guitar shop, because that felt like, right, I'm in the business.
Yeah, well, it's a good way to, you know, network and meet people, I guess.
My everyday life was about guitars, about fret height and string gauge and pick thickness, and I was very happy with that. I did a year in college in Chichester, which was a new course at the time. It was jazz and popular music, and I went there in September of 1983 or whatever it was, and that's a long time ago, man. And
I was one.
Oh, really? Thanks for that. Yeah.
Sorry. We could cut that bit out.
No, that's good. But I remember that being a real game changer as well. In fact, that's probably the time, if there was a time, when I thought, right, this is a career option for me. Because I met other musicians from all around the sort of South Coast, really, I suppose. And some of those people I still know. And one of them is Phil Williams, who's the bass player in Tony Hadley's band. Actually, we've known each other, you know, since he's a couple of years older than me, but since I was 16. So it's kind of fun. That course, yeah, it opened my mind to other music apart from rock. And I heard people like Alan Holdsworth and all that sort of stuff, and realised how that tied into the influences of other people. Alex Lifeson had a real Alan Holdsworth phase, and it was really interesting. And some of it reiterated what I'd done with music O-level. Was
it transcribing that you went into then after that job at the shop?
A bit later, yes. I mean, I suppose that when I heard things like people like Alan Holdsworth, it didn't immediately make me want to sort of study theory, but I did want to copy what he was doing. So most of my stuff has been by ear. And then having worked things out by ear, I've then realised, oh, okay, right, so that's a sharp 11th or whatever it would be. And I would say that it was primarily by ear. And the reason that I had got into theory a bit more was out of necessity. If I wanted to be, you know, working with other people, or some of the jobs that I've had teaching over the years, you know, it's not good enough not to actually know the proper jargon for these things. So I've learned it. But yeah, I was taught some of that at college. And after college, I went into that job. It was a youth opportunity or youth training scheme or something like that. But I was working on guitars and played in a kind of local band. We didn't really do that much. In fact, that was quite a discouraging experience, really, because you realise that not everybody really has the drive to do it, and that's not necessarily an issue against them personally. That's just, well, I can't sort of work with that. I'm going to need to look at doing my own thing then. And so I did end up working in another shop in Southampton, and that was great. I was working in the shop and I was teaching upstairs, supplementing my income. And that's, I suppose, where I began to think, right, if I'm going to be teaching people, I owe them I owe them that I know a bit more about what I'm saying. That's not just, oh, well, if you play this funny thing over that chord, it works. I don't know why, and I don't know what other keys you can do it in. You know, I ended up working out what the pentatonic shapes were and things like that, so I could have a more methodical approach. So I must say, to this day, I don't necessarily always sit people down with scales first and foremost. That's not really how I did it, but they can probably save themselves a few years if they take my word for it.
I mean, that's a really great skill to have, isn't it? Being able to work something out by ear. And I guess back when you were doing it, you didn't have quite so many tools available as there is now to be able to figure things out, you know. How did you do it? Was it just...
Well, I would record things onto cassette, and then the stop, rewind, play became like playing an instrument. And want to hear it again, and you'd be working out, often incorrectly, you know, as it transpires, but you'd be thinking, okay, so is that the open B string, or is it the 4th fret on the G, or is it the 9th fret on the D? And be trying to work out by the tone of it. Around that sort of time when I was working things out, and I was still at school really, and I remember being in a music class and there being a building site, a sort of housing estate being built. Go with me, there's a point to this story. Okay. A housing estate being built very nearby, and I could hear this drill being used, and I recognised that the pitch of the drill was D.
Okay,
and the music teacher said, "Oh, shut up," you know, and then went, and checked on the piano. Went, "Oh, actually, it is D." So he played some other chords to me, and I found that I could identify them. So I realised I had perfect pitch, and I think that's been a massive help,
definitely,
in working stuff out. So
is that perfect pitch, as in relative perfect pitch, or you can just hum a note and be? I can
identify notes without any other reference, and I can tune the guitar and check it against the tuner, and on a good day it will be pretty much bang on. On a bad day I'll be 10 cents flat or sharp.
It's very handy to have that built-in tuner in your head. Very impressive.
On my pedalboard for ages, but I realised that was a bit cocky, because even with perfect pitch it's possible that you can slip a bit here or there, and you know, it's best to double check.
Were you sort of being called up to come and play for certain people, or?
I don't think that really came along until I'd started playing with Tony's band, and I had the connections.
Right,
so
I
didn't put it out there that I was doing sessions, and I wasn't really known for that. Working in the shops, I'd get to know people, and you get a relationship going. Maybe the rep for Fender or Gibson might come in, and I might happen to be sat playing in the shop, which, well, confession is I'd usually be sat playing in the shop.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was pretty good. For my age, I think I was pretty good. And they would say things like, well, look, we've got this thing that we're doing, and we might get you to demonstrate the guitars. That was probably the sort of session work that I would do more than anything else.
Okay.
That led to me having a couple of calls. A guy called Stuart Bull, who is one of the guys that runs Lig Library now. They were running a thing called Total Accuracy at the time, and they got me doing some transcribing, and they got me playing at some trade shows, as did Total Guitar magazine, who I ended up working for through Stuart, funnily enough. So he really helped me. But we had a few sort of different trade shows and things like that the shops would organise, or that I'd be doing for Future Publishing that do Total Guitar. And that probably put me in front of people who would say, okay, this guy's pretty handy. Developing sort of, you know, cordial relationships with people as and when you meet them, and them hearing you're playing and liking it seems to have worked a bit.
You had that break with Tony Hadley.
That came about because I was working for Future Publishing at one of those Wembley shows, you know, one of those massive, great, noisy shows.
Yeah, I remember going to the couple of Wembley ones.
Yeah. And you come away, you know, with ringing ears and blisters on your fingers from playing all day and that sort of thing. And there's the fellow I mentioned earlier, Phil Williams, Tony Hadley's bass player, was there working for Yamaha. And this would have been 2000, or maybe late 99 even. And bearing in mind that when we left college in about 84, it was a year's course, we stayed in touch a bit, but Phil lived over near Brighton and I lived over near the Portsmouth area at the time. And when I saw Phil at this trade show, I hadn't seen him for something like 15 years, but he looked just the same. In fact, he was playing bass. He's a great player. And I recognised his left hand on the fretboard and thought, that is definitely Phil from college. And when they were on a break, I went up and we sort of had a coffee together and said, wow, how are you? And as luck would sort of have it, Phil was already playing with Tony Hadley, and their guitarist was a guy called Fraser T. Smith, who now is a producer and a songwriter working with people like Adele and Stormzy and various others, you know. And he was at that point looking to jump ship to play with Craig David, which he did. And it didn't happen for a few months ultimately, but Phil said to me that day, well, look, this is possibly going to happen. And Tony's already putting out the feelers to look for another guitar player. So, I mean, he hadn't heard me play really for 15 years at this point. So it was quite kind of him to assume that I still, knew which end of a guitar to blow into. So do you think you might think about that? And I went, well, it's a pro gig. I'd be delighted. I mean, if I'm honest, it would probably, if I'd had the pick of a few different gigs, then I might have chosen something that seemed to be more guitar-based. But to be fair, Tony's been absolutely fantastic. And eventually, yes, I ended up doing a couple of gigs with the band, and that was my kind of audition, helping out to cover a couple of gigs.
Okay, and then it just took off from there, and it was... How long have you been with the band now?
20 years.
20 years, wow. So that's a good stretch of touring the world. And
yeah, we have toured all over the world. There aren't many countries that I haven't been to with Tony. That's amazing that I've had that experience. I mean, obviously, it's on hold at the moment, but if we never did another gig, then I would still have to say, wow, what an experience. Playing some of those songs and seeing people's emotional reaction to them and everything, and being allowed to be a part of that is really quite special. I remember one particular gig in outdoors in Italy. We were somewhere near the sea. I could see the sea from the stage, and it was outdoors. Nice. And Tony will sing True, and we do this big sort of ending where he'll do his Freddie Mercury thing and then get them to sing the word True, hearing 10,000 Italians go True. Absolutely sort of funny and brilliant and moving at the same time.
Oh, that's amazing. Time. That must have been such a brilliant gig. What a sort of memory to have.
I had a load of them,
awesome.
As well.
Awesome.
So it's...
Whiz forward to today, and you're releasing your first album, right? This is the debut album for you.
I suppose that is what I would call it. The work that I've been doing with Guitarist, which has been such a great thing, as well as being glad of the work, like anyone would be. The whole thing about recording demos for them and recording blues headlines has been very different, because at home with my setup, you know how easy it is with something like Logic or Pro Tools to comp together a performance, and you can play it or you can learn it afterwards, but it's not a performance as such.
I see. Yeah.
And I've heard that there's been this thing about people comping together performances and miming to them on YouTube or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I've heard of it. I know that we don't do that with Guitarist. And Martin, the guy who is sort of engineer and producer and the cameraman on these things, he's not up for faffing about like that. We'll record a couple and have a listen back and go, well, that's probably the best one.
When you're doing these demos, you're obviously having to come up with those short pieces of music. Like, how do you keep it fresh and
I don't know. Well, one thing, and I suppose if there's an answer to that, this would also be true of recording the solos, and that is, it depends on the piece of equipment. Sometimes it might be a signature model of a player that I don't really know that much about, so I'll have a bit of a listen to a couple of their popular tunes. It tends to be some days better than others, like anything. So I'll be there. Often I will have seen that guitar for the first time that day. The process generally tends to be like this. I'll see the guitar. I'll take it out of photography tuning. During this period of time, Martin is probably off somewhere making us a coffee.
Yeah.
And Martin, being the guy that films and does it, he's a very unsung hero. He does an awful lot. You know, if you've seen filmed interviews for Guitarist, it will be Martin.
They're great. They look great. Yeah,
it's it all and does it all. Martin Holmes, and so he'll be making the coffee, and I'll sit with the guitar and I'll have a twiddle around with it, and I'll usually be sat there with the studio AC-15. There are other amps there, but we've just found that we can usually get what we want out of this, so we do that. And maybe like a tube screamer or something, or a wah, or whatever we feel is necessary. We've got these things available to us. So when he comes back, by that time, I've usually just come up with something, be it 3 or 4 chords, and working on the premise that if it's like a 2 or 3 sort of guitars in the same range, then I'll come up with about a minute's worth of idea, like an A section and a B section.
Right, okay.
And I'll probably solo over the B section, and then we'll do it again with the other guitars. And
so it's the same piece sort of thing, because that's what I was thinking. If it's say you're reviewing a guitar that's got 10 different pickup combinations or something, you're playing the same thing 10 times or something.
I do sometimes take a bit of a deep breath when I see that it's one of these with like 10 selector switch and trim back and all that, and I'm thinking, oh no. And my personal preference isn't that, I must admit, either. With all those switching options, I'd probably do what we call some bites, where I play 2 or 3 chords on each setting, and I'll make sure that Martin knows what setting each one is so that he can annotate it on the screen afterwards. And we might do a demo piece, but I'm less concerned with demonstrating every possible sound in the demo piece. Just want to show it doing one thing reasonably well. What tends to happen is we'll get whatever the sort of substance of the piece is, like a little arpeggiated thing or a riff or a chord progression, and I'll track that to a roughly programmed beat. Martin will do that with something like Easy Drummer, I think he uses. And so I'll play the part over that with him filming. I'll run it a couple of times so that I've got it together, and I'll play the part with him filming. Or if it needs a double track, I'll double track it with him filming so that we get it in as few takes as possible, so we're not faffing around. And then I'll probably go over the B section, and I'll do that for all the guitars. Let's say there are 2 or 3 guitars. I'll do that process of tracking the rhythm guitar parts for each different guitar. And then we'll go back and we'll do that same process where I'll do a solo on each different guitar with the same sound, So I'll try and make it so that it's all right to listen to as a piece of music, but serves this function as a direct comparison. So you could potentially, line it up on YouTube or whatever and A/B these things directly.
Yeah, that's handy.
And then after that, we'll put some bass on afterwards, which I've found is quite a fun way of doing it, because I just find it's easier to go and then maybe using the bass part that I've come up with, usually semi-improvised, a couple of takes. We really do, I don't want to sound slapdash, but usually find that taking bold strokes and just getting on with it is the way to do it. Otherwise, you just be there for the rest of your life.
Yeah, you can't be too sort of, I guess when there's a deadline for something like that, you've just got to say, right, well, that's done now and move on, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. And what's happened with this album that I've done is a lot of the pieces have their kind of origin in that, and I just start them again and I re-record them completely at home, because I've usually, had some other ideas, and these things are about 1 minute long and I want them to be at least 3 minutes, so sometimes I add sections. I was really happy with it, and that's a real lesson. I thought, well, that's what I come up with on the day, so that's where faffing around and piecing takes gets you. I can just play something and normally it's pretty good, and it's fairly honest as well. I haven't pulled things around into time too much or anything. A couple of things, yes, but not much.
Okay. Awesome. So shall we hear one of these tracks off of your new album?
Lovely. Now? Well, the one that I'm looking at putting first is Good Evening Viewers, which is, because of the rhythm of the main melody, reminded me a bit of the Benny Hill theme. So, obviously, straight into that cliche of, guitarist makes album with funny album title tracks, on it.
Awesome. Right, let's hear. This is Richard Barrett, Good Evening Viewers. That was Good Evening Viewers by Richard Barrett from his brand new debut album. Got Richard here today for the first episode of this Tunelectric podcast show. We've just chatted about a bit of the inspiration that you've took from certain demos that you've done for Guitarist magazine or other magazines, and you've wanted to elaborate on these sort of musical ideas. Is it all self-produced? You said you were doing a bit of producing. Have you done the whole thing? Or?
It is.
Wow.
Partly because of the whole, the pandemic thing.
Yeah.
And partly because it didn't really start out as a serious attempt to do anything, if you like. And some of those pieces, I'd had some nice comments on YouTube and things about, can I get this track anywhere and stuff like that. And so I just started seeing how good I could make it and just got really into the whole thing about producing. I really think it's as hard as playing an instrument in a lot of ways, and trying to EQ things to sound right. I've always been obsessed with getting sounds anyway. And so this is like an extension of that.
Can you chat a little bit about just a brief overview of your sort of signal chain? Are you using any sort of modeling amps, or is it a mic'd up amp that you're using, or?
It isn't. There's nothing mic'd up actually on this. I'm using an Audient Sono, which I bought from them, having done a feature on Guitarist magazine. I'd been looking around. I'd had the pod for years, like the first generation pod, which of course was completely revolutionary. And I began to realize that it was time to move on. I'm generally somebody that I don't always have the latest thing. I use a piece of gear until I've realized that I've outgrown it. Otherwise, there's probably no point for me getting the next thing. I'll just make a hash of it. So I ended up realizing that about the pod and got the Audient, because it enabled me to use pedals and things like that. And I like the flexibility of that. So the tones on this album are all using the Sono, but using the 2 notes speaker sims. Some of them, the ones that come as standard, some of them, you buy from their website. And sometimes I'll bypass the speaker sim in the unit completely and use the Torpedo Wall of Sound plugin.
Okay.
That on a few things, because you can have 2 speakers mic'd and things like that. So I'm starting to get into the complexities of that and working out how you can layer sounds and get that happening. But the basses and the guitars are all done through that, really, with different pedals. I've got various different pedals I've collected.
Cool. And what's the sort of main guitar that you're using on most of the tracks? Is it the Nags guitars that you're using there?
Well, funnily enough, Good Evening Viewers, we just heard there, that's a mixture of a Strat that I have, which is kind of bits. It's Fender licensed bits, but put together by a guy called Alan Knight, who did a really nice job of it for me. And I've had that for about 5 or 6 years now. So I used that for the melody parts. It's a mixture. And the rhythm parts on Good Evening Viewers are a Nags Steve Stevens that I use quite a lot for Guitarist, because it's just got a thick sound. Those guitars are sort of buried in the mix because there's quite a few overdubs. But, and then there's a Nags Chop Tank I have that is at least one of the solos, so it's a bit of a mess. I didn't record that all on the same day. In fact, that was a backing track that I made for playing at the guitar show last year, pre-lockdown. Anyway, that was a backing track that I made specifically for that I've messed around with until I'm sick of it and then put out.
Nice. So with the sort of, I know you've brought some of the inspiration from the demos and things that you've done. Do you have anything outside of music that inspires you to write? Any sort of influences in maybe other art forms or anything, or is there anything like that?
That's a really interesting question, and I honestly don't know. I find that ideas tend to come from I don't know where, really, and that could be, for instance, I drive from Oxfordshire down to Bath a fair bit to record for Guitarist. And that drive it's a nice drive. I go down the Foss Way and I go that way, scenic route.
Yeah.
Make it a nice part of the day, really. And I think that at times like that, looking at the scenery and stuff, you get little ideas. Maybe I don't even realise that I'm getting ideas, but I often arrive there thinking, right, what have we got today? And things will start happening. I love being out in the countryside, and that probably gives me
sort of subliminally, it's sort of influencing your choices sometimes.
I used a bit of a fake feedback on that track, actually, which I don't think I'll tell anyone about, but it was like a sustainer pedal.
Okay.
A novelty thing, really, but it was fun. I just thought I'd try it out, and it worked okay. But that track is definitely more connected with the experience of playing live and the volume and the excitement, and wanting to throw a couple of licks in there. And
it's definitely got that sort of drive and that sort of power behind that. It's a really great track.
I'm glad that was certainly what I wanted to try and get with it.
Because you're producing it and you're playing all the parts and you're programming parts and you're doing it all yourself. How do you manage to stay objective and say, okay, that's done now?
It's like playing chess with yourself. It's quite difficult to do. Going down and working with Martin for Guitarist has been a real education for me by virtue of the way that we have had to work on it. So I've tried to bring some of that mindset to this, though it has been a step backwards from that, because inevitably, if I have got the time to mess around with it, and I'll check a mix in the car and go, oh, I don't know, don't think that's right, that hi-hat's a bit loud in that section or something, and I really have agonized over things. And I've reached a point now where I just think enough's enough. I have to stop. I have to accept that at some point in the future I will listen back. I'll be better at doing it than I am now, and I'll just have to accept it was the best I could do at the time. And it would be, arrogant of me to think that I was going to be able to do it as well as someone like Trevor Horn or something. It's some fun guitar music, and I hope that all sorts of people like it.
Shall we hear another track?
Great, yes. What are you thinking of?
We have Ghost on the Bridge next.
Oh, yes.
So let's have a listen. That was Ghost on the Bridge, taken from the debut album by my guest today, guitarist Richard Barrett. Was that inspired by a spooky place or something like that? Or how did you come up with that?
Yeah, no, it wasn't actually. I thought that it sounded quite spooky. And funnily enough, I must come back to it. I did name it Ghost on the Bridge after a place, but that was after the music was made, which, if I remember correctly, was part of a feature that I did for Guitarist about altered Pentatonix. So, it was something like having the major seventh in a pentatonic, and so I did those James Bond type chords, which are played on guitar but using volume swells.
Yeah, it's a very sort of unnerving sort of sound, isn't it, that has? But
I think that. Funny enough, I'd learned it from Phil Williams way back. He'd been doing it on the bass using a delay and then fading in harmonics or a chord, and then backing the volume pedal off again while the thing was still repeating, and then bringing in another thing underneath. So that was the sort of idea.
It's giving it a bit of sort of texture as well, isn't it, with those different sounds? It's not necessarily a guitar that you say you might not be able to.
And I'm no good at
that's
keys,
a guitar.
So I didn't want a written guitar, and I'm no good at keys. So I thought, well, that's quite a good way of creating an atmosphere.
Yeah, it's a really great track. I love that one.
And well, thank you. I mean, I really enjoy playing over that kind of chord progression. And so came up with that, as I say, it's based on a 12-bar blues, really, but just with altered kind of chords. And I thought, let's get that idea back and flesh it out a bit more. That solo one, I'm quite pleased with it because of it being quite easy to record. I got a sound that I thought I liked, and I played, and I was talking to my girlfriend at the time going, I think I would like it to go something like this. And she's a musician as well, so she was kind enough to be sat there being interested in it, having heard it loads of times while I was doing the bass and all that stuff. But I listened back and thought, you know what, that's probably about where it needs to be. I wasn't looking to incorporate specific things in there. And so, that was it. I've spent ages trying to get the bass to sit right in that one. I just trying to get it to sound right. The playing bit was easy, though.
Yeah.
And the bridge. The Ghost on the Bridge was, I was reading a story about a ghost car appearing on a bridge, which was happening, funny enough, near Bath, a bridge called Shockerwick Bridge.
Wow.
And because I drive down that way fairly regularly, I thought, I'll go and have a look. And it looked quite spooky. I thought that's the last place I'd want to be driving at night and see a car coming the other way. The car apparently vanishes, as you think you're colliding with it or something.
Oh, that's
quite a fun thing. The Ghost on the Bridge. Let's have it as a sort of a theme song for that idea. And then it occurred to me that it could be a pun because there is no bridge in the song.
So the whole thing's this is sort of wow.
Oh well, it's a title, isn't it?
Is that also going to be a backing track available? Is it the whole all the tracks are?
All the tracks. Well, there's one acoustic track that I've done that won't. That's because that's just solo acoustic guitar, so that won't.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's quite a good, I guess, a good USP for the album is that you can actually interact with it in a way because you can play, you can be the guitarist in the song. So it's like a backing track. And
I haven't done those mixes yet, but I'm guessing I'll probably leave rhythm guitars in and things like that. And there's some backwards guitar on Ghost on the Bridge that's just supposed to be unsettling, and I'll leave that on there.
This is quite a good kind of concept that you've come up with these backing tracks, but it is so difficult now, isn't it, because it's so saturated. There's so many amazing players out there. Do you think it's harder now because of the way technology is? It's so much easier to get your music out there in a way, not in the traditional sense of trying to get that A&R man to come to your gig or something.
Just different difficulties, I think. I suppose at least now it will be seen by people, and probably quite a lot of people, anyone that puts anything out. I know that you always get that feeling like you're a drop in the ocean, but I don't know. I mean, I'm hopeful that there are enough people interested out there in lots of different things, so that everyone that wants to put something out and there's some sort of quality about it, whether that's just them being really sincere about what they're doing or it being amazing technically or whatever, then hopefully there's plenty of people out there that will be able to support it in whatever way, by views, likes, or buying backing tracks or whatever. No hint there, you know.
I think it's just really important that, you know, as musicians, we keep doing this. So, what out of all the roles that you've had, you know, you've done written columns in all different magazines. You've done you've toured the world. You've done all the gigs. You've done transcribing. You've worked in shops, demos.
Actually, I have done gigs. It's true.
You know, it's you've done lots of different things. Is there one thing that you like to do over all the other roles?
I really, honestly, do enjoy all of it. Or occasionally, getting near the end of a difficult transcription of a very long solo, you can think, you know, I hate my life.
But the reward of doing it is far greater.
It's definitely, you know, it's improved my ear. It makes you better as a player. You know, really getting inside what someone else is playing, and that's something that probably people less lazy than me would love to have the time to do. And I'm in the position where I'm being paid to do it, so it's, you know, it legitimately is something I can do. So I'm very aware of how fortunate that is. So no, I love all of it. Even, you know, I mean, I know that there's this idea that people resort to teaching if they haven't got any other work, but I actually really enjoy that too, because you do learn from that. People ask questions like, well, why does this happen? Why would that note work? And you think, well, I don't know. I just knew that it did. I don't know. I hadn't thought about why. And then you end up learning something yourself.
It is really good, because I've been teaching a couple of years. I sort of teach beginner to intermediate, but one of the reasons why I wanted to do it, and it kind of echoes what I've heard on a podcast by a guy called Jim Quick in America, who's sort of he's all up on his how to read the most productive way, like how, you know, reading, training your brain and all these sort of things. But it's sort of when you teach, you get to learn it twice, which I thought, yeah, that's really cool, because you're always going to miss something the first time, and every time it's like, oh yeah, that's really cool. Like, I never realized that, you know. And you're constantly learning. It's not like a thing that you get to the end of guitar and it's like, oh, I've completed that now. And
that's done. I mean, it's terrible.
It's always, there's always something new, which is what's so great about any instrument, I guess.
Well, it's been my whole life, really. You know, one way and another, and will continue to be. And
what do you think your strongest skill is out of all those things?
Well, one of the skills I think that I've brought, because I've played on a few different albums and things like that, and obviously had to come up with stuff at short order, I think one of my best skills is coming up with parts. So if somebody's got a tune and there's an existing chord structure perhaps there, and a lot of people, a lot of producers I've found, they do play a bit of guitar. I mean, they can maybe get down a rough part and they go, look, I've got it as far as I can, but I want you to make it something. You're the specialist, do something. And I really enjoy coming up with something there. And I found I think I'm quite good at that. I found that I get a lot of satisfaction out of coming up with a part and going, yeah, I think that's a good part.
Yeah, it's great to come up with those little snippets of, you know, those little melodies that you get sometimes. It's like, oh, that's a really great little melody. That's going to stick with me. You know?
Or riffs that sort of get out of the way of the keyboard for a key piece and then come back in. So I find that very satisfying. I like doing that. Producers are really happy when you've come up with something that they feel is making their job easier and making you know, it makes everyone sound better if there's good parts on it. And I like getting parts down quickly as well, you know, and being able to double track without having to keep going back and remember what I did. I'm quite good at things like that. So I think that it's a feeling of excitement because, you know, you're sort of onto something here. And it's just positive experience all round because people are happy with what the part does for the song. You know, you just like to feel you've done something well. It's satisfying.
Yeah,
and
of
that's
course.
The kind of thing, excuse me, that tends to lead to more work as well. So I'm always happy to think that I've probably, you know, improved my future life by proving my worth again.
No, it's what I've heard so far. It sounds really good album, really great. And the concept is really great of bringing it out as a backing tracks as well. I think that's a pretty
I'm
cool
really
thing.
That's an idea. As I've heard that Joe Satriani's done that as well now. So, well, hopefully it's a thing. It's at the very least, if it's becoming a bandwagon, then I'll be early on board.
So what is it that's driving you to carry on with creating music and playing guitar? Is it just the sheer love of playing?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's like an obsession that shifts focus, whether that's someone's playing, how to get a certain sound, how to get a mix. And I find that ideas come and I want to make them actually a reality. I'll make a terrible mess and then go through it and pick the good bits out. And then the result is hopefully what you hear on this album.
Awesome.
And the idea of being a musician that doesn't have any of their own music seems a bit of a shame. I've done an awful lot over the years where I've played on other people's stuff, and I'm happy with that too. But I think that I'd quite like to have something to show for my own.
Awesome. Well, listen, Richard, we've got the quick fire round coming up, and we're going to finish on the quick fire round. But first, I want to hear one more track from you. What's it going to be?
Have you got On Electric Wings or something like that?
I do have that, yes. Okay, let's hear that then. This is On Electric Wings by Richard Barrett. was On Electric Wings by Richard Barrett. He's got a brand new album that's coming out very soon. When's the actual release date for this?
Hopefully November.
Hopefully I'll get this episode out as soon as we'll see which one comes first. But now I'd like to do a quick fire round with you. Quick as you can answers for 10 questions. And here we go. I might play a little bit of countdown music or something underneath this. But here we go. What was the most memorable gig you have played and why?
The first time I played the Albert Hall with Tony Hadley. And the other one, and I was terrified on it, was I played with Roger Daltrey of The Who for a set at a charity do. And earlier that day, he'd been bored in his dressing room and asked me to come and sit with him with my acoustic guitar. And we sat and we played and chatted. Never to be forgotten, really, yeah.
All right, number 2. What style of guitar playing you'd like to get better at?
Jazz.
Jazz.
Yeah. I could probably play for about 5 minutes and make you think I could do jazz, but I can't really. Someone like John Wheatcroft who really has that sorted. He actually showed me a few things. Yeah, I'd like to be better at jazz.
Your Desert Island Blues album.
Ooh, blues album, right. I don't know if it counts as blues, but maybe On an Island by David Gilmour. But that's bluesy guitar playing, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Top album. Okay, number 4, your best tip for efficient practice.
Record yourself and listen back.
Number 5, favourite biscuit for tea dunking.
Ah, right. More of a coffee person, really. Sorry to be difficult.
Tea/coffee.
Anything with chocolate.
Okay. Number 6, which guitarist would you most like to jam with?
That's quite tricky. I've never really. There's loads I'd love to, so I'll just name one. I'd love to jam with David Gilmour, but I'd probably just want to listen. I'd love to jam with Eric Johnson too, but I'd just want to listen. Okay. Either of those, and Jimmy Page. I'd love to meet Jimmy Page and talk to him and jam with him. Yeah.
Right. Awesome. We'll write that down on your Father Christmas list. Number 7, top highlight as a magazine columnist.
Meeting Scott Gorham and John Sykes from the then lineup of Thin Lizzy back in 2006. That's awesome. A highlight.
What a memory. That sounds awesome. All right, number 8, it's Quantum Leap. You can go back in time with one word of wisdom for your younger self. What would it be?
If there's one word that says the best way to get things done is to get them done, which I have to mantra to myself.
Yeah. I should have restructured that one a bit better, I think. Maybe not one word, and I think it was more to do with your guitar playing skills rather than in general life. I'm sure it was that. Yeah. Make things happen. Don't just think about them. Be proactive.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, number 9. Sorry, Richard, I'm chopping you off there for number 9.
Oh, no, that's right. I was going to say, even if it's a mistake, even if you've made a mistake, then
of course.
You've got a position and you've got somewhere to go from then. Otherwise, it's all staying in your head and you'll get stuck there.
Right, number 9, we're almost done. Your go-to riff when trying out a new guitar.
Oh, wow. Used to be Limelight by Rush. I think now it tends to be like in E or A, couple of power chords along the lines of Won't Get Fooled Again or something like that.
Okay, yeah, awesome. Number 10, what would you most like to be remembered for?
For being good at what I do. I'd like that. I'd be very happy with that.
Awesome. This is the first episode of this podcast, and I do have quite a lot of people who said they'd like to have a little chat with me, so that's cool. So thanks very much for taking the time. Now, can you tell everyone listening where we can keep up with you online? Okay,
well, the website will be Richard Barrett Guitarist, all one word, .com. And that will go live very shortly. I'm working on it. Same as with the mixes, I'm trying to make it as good as it can be before anyone sees it. But that will be coming online at the same time as the album comes out. The album probably will be iTunes as opposed to Spotify. I'm still looking into options with it. And I have a YouTube channel that I've sorted, and that will have some things on there.
Right. Brilliant.
So,
Okay.
I'll probably do little videos helping people to figure out what's going on the tracks on the album, for instance.
Yeah, that would be handy to have. And what we'll do when this episode of the podcast goes live, we can put all the links in the show notes and everything for the podcast, where people can follow you on social media and your website address. Put all that in the show notes. Once again, thanks, Richard. Just wanted to say cheers for chatting to me today.
Thanks everyone for listening to the podcast today. I hope you've really enjoyed it. For more, check out the show notes over at tunelectric.com/podcast. This is where you'll also find the video, transcription links, and more. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and spread the word. We've got some great guests and topics lined up for you in the coming weeks, so please come back and have another listen. Cheers everyone.